Join me as we go behind the scenes of TV's most loved art detective series. Welcome to a new behind the scenes podcast for Fake or Fortune. My name is Matt Smith. I was a director and producer on the series, and if you love art mysteries as much as I do, you're in the right place. Now, in this unofficial deep dive, I'm pulling back the curtain on the stories behind making Fake or Fortune. I'll be chatting with the contributors whose art and lives were front and centre, and hearing what the experience meant to them. Today, we're diving into the Frances Hodgkins episode, and I'm excited to say Robjn Cantus is joining me to discuss the painting that split opinion. Was it a lost masterpiece, or just a messy doodle by a schoolchild? We started by catching up on that filming trip to Dolaucothi, before getting into Robjn's history of the painting. It's been about a year, hasn't it, since we last saw each other?
Yeah, it probably has. Yeah. So last time I saw you was the last day of filming.
Well, it was about last May, so it's gone fast, hasn't it? And I'm sure lots has happened since then.
Well, you'd have been dealing with me longer because you'd been editing it up, so you'd been staring at my face.
Well, I wasn't actually, because I went to Japan not long after we filmed The Verdict, and I don't think I came back again. So I more or less finished it, and then I was off, and that was it. That was goodbye to Fake or Fortune. So I don't think they're very happy that I left when I did, because it was just at the crunch point in the edit. But it was like a holiday that I'd booked like a year in advance. So I was definitely going to Japan.
Yeah. I know what I'd sooner be doing. So
yes, exactly. I think the last series was particularly complicated. I would say it was there was a lot to manage because I was working on the Angelica Kaufman episode as well. So trying to edit two of these at once is it's a test. But we got there in the end, and I was really pleased with it. So I guess you were happy with the result as well.
I was surprised, yes, that how, I mean, there's always an interesting thing because, someone like me, I won't do television normally or anything like that. It's the last thing I'd ever encounter. So you're not sure quite how you'd ever turn out to be. And I was impressed, but mostly actually the thing that really delighted me, because I saw an advanced showing of it, was all the drone footage and things like that. And I was fascinated by seeing sort of the other elements of production and the other shots. It was the technicality
Yes.
of how it all comes together and seeing how much work that went into it, really, that I just didn't get to see, or I didn't notice. There must have been a drone following or flying around some point when we're all in Wales, but I certainly didn't notice it.
Actually, those drone shots are beautiful. The ones around Dolaucothi, the light was just perfect, wasn't it?
It was a place where everything could have been a photograph. The whole drive there was so utterly beautiful, and it was just a magical bit of landscape for sure.
Yeah, and we were so lucky with the weather as well, weren't we? Because it didn't rain. It was a bit chilly, but yes, it was. It could have been far worse. So I enjoyed that day. I think that was one of my favourite parts of filming, actually. And yeah, it was so lovely to find that the inn that she stayed in, the Dolaucothi Arms, is still pretty much as it would have been when she stayed there, I guess.
What surprised me about that was actually my lack of inquiry, in that I was surprised that I hadn't really investigated the other pictures she was making at the time, because I obviously sort of had some sort of insight into all of it, but I had no idea of the picture sort of the pub that she made. And when I was shown it, I thought it was a fireplace. I'd no idea what I was looking at first, because of the doorway and sort of the thing. And then afterwards, I sort of went home and actually started looking into the other works that she was making in Wales, but I'd not even bothered to look into it really at that time.
No, I think that's what really helped it with your picture, actually. And I remember when you saw it with Fiona and she showed it you did seem genuinely surprised, which is something quite hard to do with you, because you're quite a shrewd operator and you know your stuff. But I think you generally didn't know about that picture, did you? So
Yep.
I think when you see it with the inn itself, it really does. Yeah, it's remarkable how similar they are.
I would say in my defense, at the time I'd just finished writing a book, and that my ability to process any new information was depleted for sure. I'd worked, and you take on so much work and so much writing, and you're trying to figure out what to put in, what to keep out, that you become, I describe it like carrying a bowl of soup which is far too full, and just sort of like, it's very careful act, it's sort of like the information just overspills. And actually your ability to learn something at that time that's new, you almost are not interested in it because you're so busy trying to sort of get it done. And so I think that might have been part of the problem, which was this Hodgkins came along with like a huge volume of work, which was 2 books quickly in succession. So although I knew I had it, I had very little interest in actually looking into it, or if that makes sense.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, because it's interesting one, because I did the forward planning for the last series, which was series 13, I believe. And when did I get in touch with you? I think it was January, wasn't it? Or maybe it was a bit earlier than that.
I think it was, I think I wrote in about November, and you, yes, and so I always assumed that you might have been working on the other show, which was in Cambridge, which was the Rembrandt one, because there were 2 Cambridge episodes in the season that I was on, and the Rembrandt, I think the lady had in Cambridge, I'm certain that that was a fake, which is sad for
I don't
her.
think we did. I don't think we did a Rembrandt the last one. In fact, it must have
Oh
been
no,
a
not
couple of
Rembrandt,
series ago.
Renoir.
Renoir, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
you mean the one that of the landscape?
Yeah. So and
Yes.
so she was in Cambridge, and so that sort of spiked my interest in a way, because you sort of wonder who these other people are, and then you sort of say sort of, but at least my one was legitimate, but whereas hers wasn't, unfortunately. Her father bought a dud, but how would you know? That's when you're really playing with sort of fire, when you're buying art that's expensive, really.
I loved that story though. I'm sorry, we're sort of sidetracking a little bit, but the Renoir landscape, it was I think it was a fake in the end, wasn't it? Well, that's what we think it was, but it had such a great story behind it because he was quite a character, the guy who bought it, wasn't he? And he paid a lot of money for it. I think for even then, it was probably more than what it was worth, if it hadn't
It's
been
just
right
about
anyway.
the time of the recession, so it would have been really expensive.
Yeah, yeah. But it was the lengths that someone had gone to make it a fake as well. But I was always suspicious about it because it had it's like he'd signed it all over on the back, and there was like masking tape which he had written his name on as well. And I thought, well, there's something not quite right about that. It's either someone trying to make it look more like a Renoir than it already is, or it's just a complete fake. But yeah, it was an interesting little picture. But when I saw it, I was a bit shocked because I did do some of the research on that one, but it was tiny. It was like that big, and I thought, oh, it's a little bit underwhelming. But yes, getting back to your picture. So, but you'd written into us, well, November, but that wasn't the first time you wrote to us, was it? So I was interested to know, you'd had the picture for a couple of years, and
Yes.
you'd written to us before, but no one got in touch with you.
Yes, I didn't hear back, let's say that. But the problem was probably mine, in that I wrote a sort of very brief email then saying, I have a picture which I think is Frances Hodgkins, yada, yada, yada. Whereas when I wrote in again, I realized that I'd got to the point where the abilities of my research had concluded that I couldn't get any further without someone paying to do a chemical test. And
But you're not the first person to say that, and I'm sure you won't be the last.
yeah. So and so that definitely was one, and it was more that I wrote a very hypnotic email that I knew would attract Philip, which is I wrote lots about Cedric Morris and sort of the connection there, and I made it as alluring as possible to anybody that would be on the opposite end of it, knowing the sort of art that Philip would like. So this one was definitely sort of a targeted email with lots of information and as much of what I wanted to give away at that time, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's smart because, as you know, Cedric Morris is Philip's favourite artist, I think, or favourite British artist. and he had an exhibition at his gallery on him, didn't he, quite recently? I'm still not convinced Philip knew who Frances Hodgkins was.
I have that feeling too, but Philip used to ask me about the other artists I collect, and sort of like it was so interesting that sort of every word that I uttered, every name, his eyes would glaze over even more. So yes, it was a bit disarming, really, because I always imagined that he would be someone that's sort of like really into it. But of course, his interest and his expertise were in costume, and that's how he identifies portraits, which is a really clever thing because you learn about sort of fashions in clothing and lace making even. And that's where his real skill comes in. He can look at a portrait, look at the lace style that has been made on it, and be able to age it exactly due to fashion. And that's a skill.
Yeah.
And so all these sort of 20th century people, that I collect, will practically even no interest to him, or sort of like have never been valuable enough to enter his gallery.
Also, I think it's fair to say, Frances Hodgkins, she really has, I know I've got this Penguin book, Modern Painters, in front of me, this one here.
Oh, yes.
Which you've probably seen, which I know she was one of, in a series of them. I think this was made posthumously, wasn't it? I know she knew about it coming out, but she didn't actually get to see it herself.
John or Mafanwe Piper wrote it. John Piper was put in charge of her estate after she died. And if you read some of the letters back and forth from him, he seemed to be sort of getting more and more irked, especially by the 70s, about inquiries on her. But he was the sort of the artistic executor of her estate, I believe.
I know it took her a whole life to really be recognised for the artist that she was, but it's sad that her sort of, she got forgotten so quickly, really. I know she wasn't in New Zealand.
Well, the interesting thing about her and John Piper is that how John Piper met Mafanwe Evans is that she was introduced by Kitty Church. And the other picture, which I gave to you at the beginning when sort of like you came to see me, I gave you two to sort of go away with.
Well, there's two pictures.
There were two pictures and two that needed chemical tests, which I feel really bad about, but I'm not sorry now. Because the other one was proven to be correct too. So there's another painting which I have by sort of Hodgkins, and it is of the home, the farm of Kitty Church, weirdly. So the whole thing came in a giant circle. So I'd acquired a huge amount of Kitty Church's work when her daughter Caroline had died. And she is completely forgotten, and it shows sort of quite how quickly and easily it happens. And if you look at many neo-romantic retrospectives, Kitty Church pops up all over. But the other painting which I had, which didn't make it onto the show, was of Church's house, and she was the person that, as I said, introduced John to Mafanwe Piper, and that they're all part of that orbit. And so Frances Hodgkins, sort of her literary estate was, artistic estate was managed by John Piper. So that's, I think, how he came to write that Penguin book, or be the person that's probably best for it. But yeah, her life was pretty sad in the sense that it seemed that she was just an alcoholic and had constantly run out of money. And that would also explain why both of the paintings which I have by her are not on very fine watercolor paper. The one of the farm, which you didn't get to see in the show, is on, I think, wrapping paper, parcel wrap paper. And the one that I had was on sugar beet paper, which is usually given to primary school children to paint upon. But I think she'd spent all her money on alcohol, and that then she had to sort of like finally save up or sort of try to do it. She was kept on a retainer by a gallery who then would pay her in advance in order to do works. I think the alcohol came first, and then the panic in trying to do the works later was the real issue. And that's why many of the later works are gouaches, because they're very quick. And she obviously did put work into her art, because she went to Wales and went traveling around and did a remarkable amount of stuff. But many of them are on really, really dreadful pieces of paper, which are terrible to conserve.
Yes, that's unfortunate. But actually, I think the paper they're on, it tells, it's an interesting part of her story, isn't it, as an artist? I quite like that about her.
It threw so many people off to begin with, which is everyone looked at it and just, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why the one that was on the show remained undiscovered for so long, was that the paper quality was so appallingly bad. And I, as I said, I'd acquired it and from the Cambridge auction house, and I'd bought it with another one. I kept the other one on the wall and was delightfully happy with that, the Vera Cunningham. And
Yes.
this one, I just had no idea who did it. I thought it was a student that had copied John Piper, in all humble honesty. And
Okay.
you know, how we got onto this sort of the ball rolling was that I put it onto my blog, and then a rather strange set of emails came along, and that was from someone who I've still very little idea on who they really are, but it was a sort of, I'd say, a rather unpleasant exchange of taunting, in that I sort of there's this picture on my blog and I don't know who it is, and I was too busy and to really even play whatever game he was doing. But over a series of emails, he kept sort of like sending rather taunting and strange things, saying, "Haha, you don't know who it is." And I didn't. I think I responded to one or two, and then I just stopped responding. And then eventually, he just said, "Oh, right, it's Frances Hodgkins," and that was that. But he
And
tried to acquire it in the series of emails, you know, so are you selling this, you know, sort of all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't sort of like
really,
out of wonderful joy or sort of, you know, that. But I mean, I owe him
yeah,
a favor, you know, I'm sure, or sort of I
yeah.
owe him one bit of credit, but I didn't want to give it to him at the time. So
So just going back a little bit then, so that when you bought it, I know you bought it with the pitch where you bought it for the lot. It had there was two lots in the sale, two pictures in the same lot. One was a Vera Cunningham, which you were sure about, and this other picture, it was described as in the circle of or star of Vera Cunningham.
Vera Cunningham garden scene. That's what's written on the back of it from the
Right,
council. That's actually what
that was written on
Hertfordshire
the back.
of
Yeah, of course,
the
because we never saw
original.
it in the frame, did we? But it was in a glass frame which you removed it from because it smashed. Is that right?
It was in a Perspex and Nielsen frame, those sort of like 1970s, 80s frames. And I think it's probably 80s that it was done in, because it's sort of a brassy, sort of tan coloured frame. And that was very
Right.
much in vogue then. And
Yeah.
that's what really, I think, that frame is the cause of all the problems in that picture's lifestyle, because it obviously been uh, so obviously it had been broken. In the original frame that it was in had probably fallen off the wall, and
Oh, I
the
see.
glass had smashed, and I think the frame was probably destroyed. This is all conjecture, but
Yeah.
because they were pictures that were hung in schools, it must have somehow been damaged. It'd gone to the framers, and by the time it had come back, it was unattributed. And so all the information that was on the back of the other ones was lost.
Yes.
And that's my
Yes.
guess in what happened to it. Because it was the Vera Cunningham and the two other Frances Hodgkins that were known about, that were donated, they think, to Hertfordshire Council. That's what I've been led to
Mm,
believe, that they weren't
mm,
acquired in a really unusual move. They'd been donated and the council had accepted them.
mm.
Hertfordshire had a huge amount of budget for acquiring art for schools, and so anyway, how they ended up in the collection, we don't know. With the problem with what we were doing with the show was we were trying to get the Tates to answer an email about telling us who actually had acquired it from Lefebvre Galleries, and the
Mm.
person who was in charge of that was off ill, and I've tried since
Oh,
to
I'd
contact
forgotten
him.
about that.
Yeah, and I've tried since to contact him, and I've never got a response. So I don't know if
Right.
it's a freedom of information thing, and that the person may still be alive, or you know that there's some sort of issue with knowing that information. But I've never got to the bottom of it to find out who actually had acquired it from Lefebvre, owned it, and then donated it to Hertfordshire Council for their Pictures of Schools scheme. So it's
Yeah.
always been a bit of a mystery.
Yeah. I mean, there's still that quite big gap in the provenance, isn't there? But the when you bought it, did you think it was a Vera Cunningham, or were you straight away, that's definitely not a Vera Cunningham? You just thought it's probably a follower of John Piper or something?
I mean, I wouldn't say that there's enough examples of Vera Cunningham's work online to be able to say for certain that it was or wasn't. I knew that I didn't really like it that much, if I'm humbly honest, and that it went into a barn and stayed there. So, and until I got these emails about the blog, and uh, then it was lockdown by that point, and that was
Yeah.
a period of time where we were locked down in this country, but New Zealand weren't. He'd said that it was a Frances Hodgkins, and so I went onto LinkedIn. I found the woman who'd written a really good book on Frances Hodgkins called Mary Kisler, and she'd been
Yes.
to Dolaucothi too. She'd actually been to the site of where it was painted, oddly.
Oh, has she? I
So
didn't know that. Okay,
it
right.
appears in the book, but she'd actually visited. So I called her up on WhatsApp and I said, hello, I think I've got a Frances Hodgkins. Can you help me? And she said, well, it probably isn't a Frances Hodgkins, but send it over, we'll see. And about a week later, I got a really wonderful PDF of all of the details in why she thought it was a Frances Hodgkins, which are very positive. And she was more than delighted to be able to find that there was another picture on the back as well, which she'd never seen. So this picture
Yes.
had remained completely out of orbit and out of sight since it was sold. And that's the other peculiar thing, that sort of when something is entered into a council scheme, this is before the internet, you know, sort of, and before books of cataloguing the whole public collections were about. And by the time that those books that were documenting the collections, which later became the basis of Art UK, came out, the picture had been misattributed because it had fallen off the wall and been reframed. So that's how it escaped so many hoops. And lots of people sort of talk about the auction house saying, oh gosh, aren't they fools for not knowing? Well, the council didn't know. The Hertfordshire Council hired really expensive people to come in and judge their collection and look into all of it, and sort of like as an insurance thing. And they had no idea. I think the council's collection was worth £25 million, but £24 million of it was a Hepworth and a Henry Moore sculpture. So, but it was a fascinating report to read, which, you know, is another bit of, you know, the provenance that I was trying to get into. But
Yes.
trying to find pictures of these works in schools is as rare as hen's teeth. It only happens when a school opens, or if it's a giant mural. And so this work, you know, sort of like, and sort of contacting Mary Kisler, it's, you know, she had no idea what it looked like, but she judged from all the pictures that I'd sent that it was real. Another reason why I thought it wasn't particularly real was because it had sort of really scruffy pencil drawings over it and under it, and, you
Yes.
know, in the paint.
They
And
did look
that
a bit
completely
childlike,
threw me.
those, didn't they?
Yeah. It's but also I'd not really encountered too many examples of her work, and when I had, there were always the early oil paintings. So I had very little idea. And to be perfectly honest with you, which sort of sounds quite arrogant, I didn't really care about it that much. And so if it's real, it's wonderful. If it isn't, it's, you know, I got the picture which I wanted anyway, and they were £35, so that was like £48 in total with the premium. So it wasn't too bad. I mean, sort of, it's
And
not.
then it was the second time it had come up for auction as well, wasn't it? Because am I right in thinking it had sold previously, but the buyer hadn't paid, and so it was put into the next one?
Well, that's an interesting story too. If you Google Hertfordshire collection, BBC, Cheffins, and police, you come up with a report which says that this auction was stopped due to suspicious bidding. And Cheffins actually cancelled more or less all of the Hertfordshire pictures that were sold that day from people that they did not know. So if someone was in the room, they sort of went through it. But anyone online, they cancelled all of the bids, which is why it came up again. So I have a picture which I think I bought for £85, which in the first sale sold for 1,400, and it's complete sort of nonsense. And it's by a woman called Nancy Ewart, and absolutely not worth that amount of money. But due
Oh,
to
what? So
suspicious
they
bidding, yeah, someone was just bidding away and bidding away.
and this is like a bot or something, just clicking bid all the time, presumably.
I mean, it could have been the person sort of that was sending me the emails. There were lots of people that were very angry over Hertfordshire's pictures of schools going up for sale as well. There was a campaign to stop it as well. And I met the person who was in charge of that recently, which is interesting because all of these personalities and people that were interested in saving it made it sort of quite a unique thing. But in the end of the day, the council just wanted to sell it. It goes into a story, which is that Cambridge is really the problem for all of the pictures of schools' works going up for sale. So we're responsible, and it's because Cambridge doesn't have a municipal gallery. All of them are owned by the university. So any works owned by the council couldn't be donated into a local gallery, and the council didn't want them, and they'd stored them rather poorly, and sort of underneath a library, and sort of all these sorts of things. And when it came to selling them, they'd got nowhere locally that they could donate them to that would remain in the council's orbit. So that's why they sold them. And then when Cambridge put theirs up for sale, Hertfordshire did the same, and then Derbyshire, and then Nottingham, and then Wiltshire is slowly selling off their works rather quietly, but they're leaving the council's orbit as well. In sort of vast numbers, but a lot of the councils rarely ever want to declare it. And recently, Kent have sold their pictures as well, which, being a reform council, and they're strapped for cash, they're just sort of selling off any asset that they could get a hold of. And Kent's pictures of schools went up, and the prints were really lovely. I don't know if the works that were on paintings for Kent were put into galleries. I'm hoping so, because the ones that came up for auction were miserable. Really grim works. So it shows.
Well, you're a fantastic researcher, and you're very good at finding out about these things. So how do you, if they do keep it quiet, how do you spot these potential sleepers that are going under the hammer?
The Cambridge one was that I had seen the works on Art UK, and there was a picture by a chap called Nick Lyons, who was a wonderful artist who was at the Cambridge School of Art and gave up to become a carpenter. And it's possibly, I don't know sort of how much money he made doing carpentry, but it's possibly his biggest mistake, because he's a brilliant artist. But there was a painting of a tractor, and I wanted that so much, and I knew it was in the council's collection. So when it appeared at auction very quietly one day with 10 other works, I thought, oh, that's curious. And so I went there and I spoke to one of the auctioneers, and they said, yes, this is from the council, please don't tell anyone. And it was the trial run. So sort of they'd put in 10 pictures before they'd announced that they were selling off the Cambridge works. And it was one of them. And I think I bought all but 2 from that auction. And luckily they did it like that, because it basically allowed me to acquire so many. And then when it came to the actual second, so then it happened in 3 other auctions, which was, the first one was the announced one, which was all the oil paintings and expensive ones. I only bought one of those because they were very expensive. And then the second and third one, so sort of the second one were pictures of 10, sort of like all stacked up against the wall, not even hung up. And I bought probably about 4 lots of those, which is, another 40 pictures. And by this point, you're sort of thinking, oh God, this is a bit much. And then the third one was just like a general domestic auction where these are the pictures that no one else wanted. And again, luckily it was about 4 or 5 months down the road, so I'd saved up enough money to buy more of those as well.
So is this where your collection started then, buying these pictures for school pictures, or were you collecting before that? It sounds like you've collected a lot of pictures from these sales.
Yeah. I have. Yeah, Derbyshire was possibly the most extreme, because the works from Derbyshire appear very small online, but I acquired a tapestry which is 1.5 meters by, I think, 2 meters. And I had sent a friend down with a van, which doesn't make me feel very good, because he only bought 1 picture from this auction, and I'm humbly sorry. But he collected the rest of them, and he managed just to wedge this tapestry into this van. But yeah, so I'd acquired quite a lot that day too. But how I started was, I don't know. So a friend of mine that's recently died, she was married to an artist called Warwick Hutton, and her friend was Lizzie. And I think actually she is the person that is responsible for my career, thinking about it, in that I had met her and she had intrigued me with different books on British artists and 20th century ones, and mostly East Anglian ones. And it was really through her that I sort of became fascinated by it. And then I realized that they all knew each other, and in some cases, you know, they worked with each other. John O'Connor, who's someone I've collected a lot of his works by, he was the head of Colchester School of Art, and he hired Dickie Chopping, who had designed most of the James Bond covers, all but one, for the books.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they're
John
great,
Nash,
they are.
the First World War artist, he hired him to teach botanical illustration. All sorts of people, but you realise there's a huge amount of talent. And from Dickie Chopping, and you've got Francis Bacon, so sort of like who was hanging around and actually had a house in Essex due to sort of like hanging around with him. And you realise that sort of the world was so much smaller then. And I think that reading books and biographies, I've become drunk on the leapfrogging of lily pads of different people. And these days, it's so interesting and easy to read a biography and hear it, or like acquire a name which is lesser known, and type it into Google and then find that there's 4 of them on eBay for like £20 each. And then before you know it, there's 4 more pictures in your house. But that is my sort of problem. And sometimes these people are fascinating because in many cases, these are women that have been, they trained at the Slade and they've got married and their names have changed. So by the time that sort of they are appearing on eBay, then they're signing their work with their married name, and very few people knew the details of that they were at the Slade because no one's updated that information.
Of course, yes. Okay.
So that's the reason why sort of the collection started, which is sort of just being able to acquire work cheaply. It isn't out of you know, sort of big bossiness. In fact, probably the picture behind me is the only picture which I think I've ever wanted and never acquired, or I didn't get to buy at auction. And I was fuming about it. And then it ended up with a dealer, and I saw it at the Mall galleries on their stand, and I mean, it's not fair to say angry because, you know, this is the way it is, but I really wanted it, which was that one. And and I was, yeah, I was pissed off. So sort of, but they didn't sell it. And then I think again, it was during lockdown that it got sold and put up for auction, and that's where I bought it, and I went all out for it. There was no way I wasn't coming back with that. So and
did you end up getting it for the price you wanted it for in auction then? Was it less than what they were trying to sell it for at the gallery?
Which is exactly
well done.
You know. But yeah, and I spent most of the time sort of doing the frame. The frame was the reason why it hadn't sold, because it was all chipped and wretched. And I took all sort of all the plaster off and sort of then sort of redid it and painted and waxed and, you know, painted it. I think it took me about 3 days of work. But what do you do in lockdown? So there was nothing else to do. But yeah, so you know, it's that sort of thing that keeps you going.
And who's the artist of the picture behind you? Who is it?
Pitt Lewis, who
Pitt Lewis.
So no one knows who she is really, sort of, if you ask anyone. So sort of like completely unknown. Again, a brilliant example of this. Catherine Lewis, she was married to an artist called Morland Lewis, who was a Second World War artist who died, just like Eric Ravilius. And then she married a chap called J.M. Richards, who, again, lesser known, but he was the editor of the Architectural Review, I think it is. But he was previously married to a woman called Peggy Angus, who was, you see, this is a leapfrogging. So sort of J.M. Richards, her second husband, was married to Peggy Angus, who had a house in Sussex called Furlongs, which is where Eric Ravilius conducted all his affairs. So, and famously painted that house a great deal of the time. And J.M. Richards wrote the book High Street for the pictures of Eric Ravilius. So there's a really strong Ravilius connection to this artist, but no one knows who she is. So, and she hasn't really sort of like entered that orbit, but she was definitely around those people. And it's that Bardfield sort of like fascination that I have that sort of led me to acquire.
Do you think there's anyone else out there with your knowledge, your niche knowledge of forgotten artists, 20th century artists?
I mean, there definitely would be. I mean, there must be more people like me secretly, quietly hoarding. The only difference is I wrote a blog and sort of like I write books, but I think a lot of people must be sitting on things like this, and everyone must have their own information. There's wonderful blogs about sort of northern artists and things like that which appear, but the problem is that unless you write it down, you are just hoarding and you're secretly sort of maniacally collecting and keeping this away. There is an issue with that.
There's no story behind them, is there?
Yeah.
Sorry,
you're destroying the value almost by not sort of telling the story or not having them be seen. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm unique for sure, but I mean, the level of extent of knowing about things like early artists of the Slade or sort of the strange Jewish artists that I've collected and things like that is definitely a hobby, but you know, I could be playing Pokemon and wasting my time really. So there's better ways.
Pokemon cards are very valuable, Robin. So
but you know, sort of you know, everybody wastes their own time, sort of, you know, sort of like you could be badger baiting or something, you know, sort of there's always something sort of weird hobby that someone's got. So but this is just what I've decided to do with my time.
On that note, we'll leave it there for part 1. It's fascinating to hear how Robin's passion for collecting began. In part 2, we'll delve deeper into the story of Nan Youngman, the driving force behind the Pictures for Schools scheme. And if you'd like to see Robin's collection for yourself, a selection of works, including the Frances Hodgkins painting featured on the show, is currently on display in the Pictures for Schools exhibition at David Parr House in Cambridge, running until early August.